Welcome to the Clinical Athlete Journal Club number 8. My name is Quinn Hennick, and I'm a proud clinical athlete provider, and I'm joined as always by Kevin McNamara, who recent PT school grad and just started his residency at Johns Hopkins. What's up, Kevin?
Not much, Quinn. How are you?
I'm good, man. You're doing big things.
I'm surviving.
That sounds about right.
Yeah,
It's like it's a new thing. It's just one new thing.
exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't stop though. You could be bored out of your mind and not doing anything with your life. So there's alternatives to this, right?
Exactly.
You're like, well, that actually sounds pretty good. All right. On that note, remember our motto for the Journal Club. These meetings are conducted in the sincere spirit of inquiry after truth, without fondness of dispute or desire of victory. Our topic for tonight is fatigue and its role in pain, injury, performance. We've got those 4 articles, and I'm going to steal Kevin's line and say I don't even know where to begin with this topic. So I think if we're going, I read the papers in chronological order. So it was the Anoka 2016 paper that I read through first, and I actually think that was a really good place to start because it was more of a conceptual framework of what is fatigue. And they provided a new definition and kind of a new taxonomy or framework from which to think about fatigue, and they questioned some older or some commonly held notions of the construct itself. So I thought it was actually a really good read. And what was interesting is the Anoka paper defined fatigue as a disabling symptom in which physical and cognitive function is limited by interactions between performance fatigability and perceived fatigability. So their thing was fatigue is a symptom. It's a symptom of some type of functional decline. And there's 2 proposed attributes of fatigue. And remember, this is all coming from their newly proposed model. So none of this has been validated. This is what they're proposing. That there's 2 attributes to the symptom of fatigue: performance fatigability and perceived fatigability. And I just thought it was interesting the way that they broke that out. If we go to their figure here, perceived fatigability has modulating factors of homeostasis like blood glucose, core temperature, hydration, neurotransmitters, metabolites, oxygenation, wakefulness. Perceived fatigability also has psychological states that are modulating factors: arousal, executive function, expectations, mood, motivation, pain, performance feedback. On the other attribute of fatigue is performance fatigability. So that's more of the objective measures like contractile function, where they're looking at physiology of muscle contractions like calcium, kinetics, force capacity, blood flow, metabolisms and byproducts, stuff like that. The other side of it is muscle activation, when we're looking at the nervous system's kind of motor function, voluntary activation, activation patterns, motor neurons. So the way that I perceived this is that this group was saying there's so many studies out there that look at different aspects of fatigue, and they try to put them into buckets. Like, is this central fatigue? Is this peripheral fatigue? Is this supraspinal fatigue, muscle fatigue? They're trying to compartmentalize the types of fatigue. And this author group's argument was that you can't. All of these things have interplay, dynamic interplay within each other. It's all happening on a sliding scale. So instead of trying to compartmentalize different types of fatigue, let's define fatigue as a single entity, as a single symptom that's modulated by these factors, by a whole host of factors. And they compartmentalize a little bit by saying for perceived fatigability versus performance fatigability, but they also can see that there's interplay. So it pulled on my heartstrings a little bit in the sense that they were acknowledging the dynamic nonlinear relationship of fatigue and how we can't just compartmentalize the construct. But at the same time, I'm not sure it clears anything up. It's just an interesting thing. It's an interesting lens with which to look at things. And then if they were to use this lens and then do future research, then that might actually add to the body of evidence. The other thing that I thought was interesting is the other papers cited this group, this same Anoka group, in earlier papers like 2008 and 1992. I was looking at some of these papers from the same group. They were actually differentiating these different types of fatigue. So it's cool to see an evolution of a research group. You know, and now their most recent thought is like, you know what? We've been trying to separate these constructs and define this thing for 2 decades now, and it just ain't that easy. And now here's what we're proposing as a more of an all-encompassing framework, kind of like the pain discussion that we had a couple episodes back. But I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. But I just thought the Anoka 2016 paper was a nice place to start, as it was more of a conceptual framework to think about. Kevin, what do you think about that paper?
I like the Anoka paper a lot. I think that there's been even like there was a recent update, I think, from another author that basically kind of moved more towards like central governor model of fatigue. But I think the Anoka paper was really good, just kind of, and there is parallels to pain. I thought it was a great sort of update on kind of the way these things are moving, the thought process around people that are in the field trying to come closer to truth on what this exactly is. But I don't know if it's caught on really, because I'm sure we'll talk about this, but we still don't really know what fatigue is, and there's no consensus throughout the literature really anywhere.
Well, even the central governor, so it's like Tim Noakes, central governor, and then it's like Samuel Marcora. You can't separate perception and fatigue. And I see the central governor argument versus like top down versus bottom up. Essentially, it's a conversation that's the debate. Isn't that the same across isn't that exactly what we're debating in every other realm? Pain processing, top down versus bottom up. And what do we start to actually realize is that the arrows are going both ways all the time. There's these peripheral mechanisms and cascades that are happening at the same time that the brain is interpreting those, and also taking in our memories and our expectations and our past experiences and our predicted experiences, and trying to just blend all those things together. That's what it just makes this really, really hard to pin down. And that was the theme in all of these papers, was what operational definitions are we working with here? So I just kind of go down the line here. The O'Sullivan paper was cool. It was a real short read. It was Peter O'Sullivan, and Kieran O'Sullivan was actually the lead author there, and then Tim Gabbett, third author. And it's just kind of an argument that you would manage fatigue and pain in a similar way, where they might not be the same from an experience standpoint. Like, people might differentiate what they're feeling. Like, no, this is pain. This is something different than what I've felt before, which is a tiredness or like a weakness from training. But it doesn't necessarily change the way that we manage it. Seemed to me to be their argument. Whereas we can see that it's multifactorial, both pain and fatigue. We identify the factors that are like the triggers, essentially. I'm looking at on page 1 of the O'Sullivan article. They've got that diagram there, where one side, the purple side, is like you're trying to scare people away from moving. Like, oh, you're in pain, you should stop, you're gonna hurt something. Oh, you're fatigued, you gotta back off, you're gonna overtrain. And then kind of the cascade that happens there, which is fear mongering, nocebo, fear avoidance, detraining, essentially, because you do too little. And then the other side of that, the red boxes, were kind of the opposite, where the coach is like, and that's healthcare provider on the left. That's what the authors are saying. Healthcare providers tend to baby the athletes. And we're scared of pain, and we're scared of fatigue, and we're gonna overflow our bucket. Whereas the other side in the red was like the coach's standpoint, where it's stop, pain is weakness, just train through it. This is gonna toughen you up, and then the end result potentially is overflowing your bucket. Now we actually go into that whole side of doing too much, and then there's a mental cascade there as well, of the athlete maybe feeling like they're not good enough, they can't handle the work, that type of thing. And their argument seems to be like we kind of meet in the middle, where we concede fatigue and pain are both multifactorial. We identify the triggers, whether it's fatigue or pain. Now, what's making you the most, what's kind of contributing the most to the stress bucket, we would say. Maybe we pull back, we don't have to pull back everything, but we pull back certain avenues of your training so that we can allocate energy to other things. We educate that, okay, you're tired, you're hurt, we're not going to freak out about it, we're going to acknowledge it, we use it as information, we use it as kind of a guide to some extent, but there's some give and take there within that. So it doesn't mean that you're broken necessarily, and it doesn't mean that you're just going to fall off a cliff and your performance is never going to bounce back. Like especially in fatigue, like sometimes that's just a normal part of training hard. We get our weightlifters here, let's say they got to meet in 4 or 5 weeks. That's around the time that training is the most difficult. They're going heavy, the volume is still there, and they feel pretty beat up and tired. And sometimes you have days where performance drops off, and they're, like, I got to meet in 4 weeks. I can't lift this weight now. How am I going to lift it at the meet? You start playing those games. And so that's where we can step in and say, no, it's a part of the process. We got plenty of time. We can manage these things. You're going to bounce back, that type of thing. And the same with pain. And then what happens in an ideal world, the last box there in the middle, the green box, is physical and psychological resilience is enhanced because they come out on the other side of this negative experience, and that updates their beliefs and their those types of things and their expectations, and hopefully build some independence and some self-efficacy that, I made it through this time, I can make it through again. So the next time they have an experience like that, they're not so freaked out about it. And I'm reducing the message here, but that's kind of what I took away from that paper in particular. What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
That was probably, if not my favorite, probably my second favorite paper of it all, especially for viewing it from a healthcare perspective, because I don't know when everybody got like so afraid of fatigue, and I think it really kind of showcases the interesting, probably the same mechanistic pathways between pain and fatigue. And I think that's a great way to not only approach someone in the midst of a pain experience, but like you said, managing fatigue as well, whether you're striving for, end range athletic performance. I think if you could kind of structure your clinical reasoning, like as a clinician, under some of that framework, I think a lot of this stuff would probably resolve itself, and we're going to leave people in a much better position than they were when they first got to us. So I really enjoyed the paper a lot.
And again, just if people are following along, this is the paper titled Pain and Fatigue in Sport, Are They So Different? And we're looking at the diagram on page 1. Sometimes, do you ever get the sense, Kevin and anybody else, that when we're saying, time is our friend, we don't have to flip the program upside down, we don't have to do a lot extra, we just make some subtle tweaks, step back and see how you respond. Sometimes that's perceived as not doing enough. And one reason why I like papers like this that confirm my biases in that sense is that you don't have to be a magician as a clinician or a coach.